begins to lose feeling. And as you lose feeling, you just begin to damage your body, and you don't know that you're damaged. The book talks about a guy who stepped on a nail in a board and kept walking, never realized that he had stepped on a nail. When I was a child, I stepped on a nail, and I knew it, the neighbors knew it, and everyone in the neighborhood knew it. And I went home screaming and crying with a nail and a board sticking out of the bottom of my foot, and they had to pull it out and take me to the hospital. And I mean, you'd have thought they'd shot me because I was in agony. And it's a process. He never knew that he'd stepped on a nail. So he kept walking. And the nail and the board kind of worked its way around in his foot as he walked, and then caught on something, and literally he kind of had to pull his leg and pulled that nail out. But even after he pulled the nail out, he never stopped. He never held his foot up. He never went and got methylate, or I don't know, Chelsea, whatever it is you're supposed to put in. Ask Chelsea what you put in an open wound. She can tell you all about that. She can probably show you pictures if you want to see. Bring a few pictures from school. And you would tend to it. And then we'd see you at church, and your foot would be up, and you'd want to tell the story of how you were out working in your yard, and you stepped on a nail, and now you're in such agony, and everybody's going to go, oh, we feel so sorry for you. A leper looks like you. Never limps, never bandages, never repairs. And in India, they often walk barefooted. In India, there's animals in the streets. In India, there's what's left over when the animals pass by in the streets. And you walk through that with an open wound. And so literally it's like putting your foot in a unflushed toilet and leaving it there for a while. And the bacteria attack your foot, and the injury, before he ever realizes that he's injured, the injury's infected and oozing and in deplorable condition. That's leprosy. Leprosy is also highly contagious. So if you have one of your best buddies and you played basketball in the yard, and you wrestled and you played football with, and you used to knock each other around occasionally. I guess I'm talking about from the boys' perspective. From the girls' perspective, on each other's shoes, you did each other's hair. I don't know what all you do as a little girl. But if you did those things and they got leprosy, you'd do none of those things. You wouldn't do anything. The Bible describes leprosy as someone with leprosy had to cover their face and walk through the streets. Unclean, unclean. Stand back, stay away. And everybody, recognizing that they could be in that position, would steer clear. As far on the other side of the street as you possibly could get, they would stay away from a leper, because you might get leprosy. And literally, you know that they put lepers in colonies, and they were brutal places, and a few movies have pictured them as open pits with caves that extend back into the hillside, or in caves, and families would come up and call out, we're coming, and they would leave food in the entranceway, and then they would back away at a distance, and they might see a loved one from a distance and wave. That's leprosy. Now, let's look at the scripture again. Now, when Jesus was in Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, he was known to be Simon the leper. Everybody probably knew that Simon had gotten leprosy. You don't go to the house of Simon the leper unless Simon the leper was your old name. Simon the leper was the name that you used to have. You know, Anybody ever had a nickname as a child? Fatty 2x4 can't fit through the bathroom door every time. I had a friend who always called me Jark Monson. And he would call me that in school. Hey, Jark Monson, how are you? He was my next door neighbor. He all the time. Hey, Jark Monson, and he called me Jark Monson all the time. I can't tell you what Titus's friends have called him for years. I couldn't say that in an auditorium. They called him all kinds of names. Titus is not really a great name to have as a child and not be made fun of. They shorten it, they cut off a couple letters, they do all kinds of things to Titus and call him names. I'm sorry, I told you. If you didn't know that, I apologize, I told you. They made fun of him with his name. Simon the leper is that. Simon the leper is who he used to be. Simon the leper is serving you supper, and Simon the leper is sitting on the couch with you, and Simon the leper, he's no longer Simon the leper. Simon the leper, the former leper. Calls it Simon the leper's house, but obviously if he's there, he's one of those people that used to be. There's a great song. And it was real popular for a short while. It's a popular song, not a gospel song. Somebody that I used to know. It's really a very interesting song. You're just somebody that I used to know. And the whole premise of the song is this boy and girl were dating for a while, and he didn't get it. He didn't get to meet the needs of his wife. I don't know you anymore, and I'm not going to know you anymore because you're not going to treat me like you used to treat me anymore. I have value, and you're not going to devalue me. And she sings in this song, you're just somebody that I used to know. And for her, it's a celebration of freedom, and for him, it's a statement of stupidity. I've made the mistake. I didn't do right. I would like to know you, but you're just somebody that I used to know. I'm going to put Simon the leper in that category. Simon the leper was somebody they used to know. He's not Simon the leper. You can't know him as that. I think the author put his name in there that way because he was just trying to describe him for the community, for the people around. That's who he was. They say it was probably nard or some sort of a very, very expensive oil that was only found in India. Dave Stokely got into oils and scents and incense, and so he got and looked up original incense manufacturers or something like that, and he actually found an incense company from India on the internet, and he studied the scents that went into the oils of the tabernacle. And he ordered, and of course, we're not sure exact quantities or anything like that, and he's not trying to do an exact one-to-one, but he ordered the oils and the incense and the spices that belong in some of the temple oils that they used in the Old Testament. And he did it all from Google. And so he ordered all of these oils and oils that you can use for different incense. And it's a dive deep project. He's got to figure out all the details and get it exactly right and order all the stuff and then mix it himself. And he did that. And I have some sitting on my desk, some incense, scented oils that he created. It's really a cool project. He did it over Google. That's not what we're talking about. In Jesus' day, it would have to come by camel caravan, weeks and months across the desert. It'd have to be carried in an individual would have to buy it and spend his money and then risk his life and travel. And so the whole effort made getting a few pounds of incense outrageously expensive. Some of you, and you may have gone to the store and spent $40 a bottle, or maybe some of you are $60 a bottle kind of people, or maybe some of you are really outrageously wild. And most of us in here, that would be what, in the $300,000 range? Or maybe the $20,000 range. Can anybody in the room imagine spending 20 grand on your bottle of perfume? 20 grand on incense, and then put it in a box of alabaster. Of course, you're generally not. The other day, I came across a little can of Barbasol. It's like a travel size shaving Barbasol can, except it's a safe. And I'm going to tell you where I keep my money now. And I really have all my earthly goods in a Barbasol can that's about this big, okay? Just so you know, it's not extensive wealth here. And I did it for when we travel. We're actually going to be going to Hong Kong this year to do a crusade or do a conference in Hong Kong this summer. And I'm going to go back and preach at a guy that I taught in college 28 years ago. He started a church, and now they're celebrating their 25th anniversary. And so he's asked me to come and preach their 25th anniversary. So my wife and I are going to go to Hong Kong for a week or so this summer. And it's where Titus was born, and while we were missionaries there. And so Titus and his new wife are going to try and go with us. So the four of us are going to go and do a conference in Hong Kong. So pretty cool. So when you travel, you think about if you lose all of your money, if you keep it in one place and someone steals that one item, you've lost all of your money. And it's a good idea if you're traveling to kind of spread your money around a little bit. So we're going to have a little Barbasol can. The lid pops off and it's hollow. And we're going to put a couple $100, mad money, just wild, outrageous, mad. You know how I am, just wild money, and put a little couple $100 in there and put it in my shaving kit. I hope nobody steals my shaving kit, but we're going to hide it away in a Barbasol can. Typically, if let's say you make 50 grand, you're typically not going to put it in a Barbasol can. You're going to put it somewhere that you consider safe. Whether that's in your mattress or in a jar in your backyard or in First Federal Bank, you're going to try to find a place that shows value to what you value. You're not going to leave it on the counter generally. And so an alabaster box represents great value. It was a highly sought after, beautiful, generally white box. And so she takes her $50,000 of incense and puts it in a highly valued vase. From what I've read, they literally, it's so valuable and so precious that they'd put it in this vase, and you actually had to break the vase open or break the box open, and you ruined the box in order to use the perfume. So it's that valuable. Again, research says it's for funerals. The only time that you would do this is when you die. That you break the box because you're saving it for death. You bought it for death, and then you're going to cover the smell of your death with incense. And so as they're preparing a body to be buried, they would break this box open. It's no longer going to be used. And they would pour out this oil because it will never be used. And it's going to be used to cover the smell and to anoint the body as it decomposes. Now, there came unto him a woman having an alabaster box of very precious ointment, and poured it on his head as he sat at meat. We're talking about hard choices, life choices. Think about that. He's not dead. According to study, this is 6 days before the cross. He's told his disciples in Galilee, I'm going to head to Jerusalem and I'm going to be offered. My time is at hand and I'm going to die. Peter rises up. No, Lord, you're not going to do that. I rebuke you. Jesus says, get thee behind me, Satan, because you just don't understand. You're clear-headed. You know what you're doing. You've got a boat and a business. You got a family heritage. You have job skills and capabilities. You followed me for 3 years and you have a general idea of what's going on. But you really don't understand. I think one of the things that jumps out so much to me is this next statement. But when his disciples saw it, they had indignation. They were offended. Who's offended? Simon the tanner? No. The woman with the box? No. Who's offended? His disciples. Okay, who's offended? The guys who ate with him the night before. The guys who walked through the field, and when they were hungry, they got some ears, and they broke open some ears, and they did the chaff, trying to get the chaff away so they could come out with the kernels and eat them. And when they got complained about by the religious Jews, it was Jesus that defended them. It was Jesus that protected them. It was Jesus that helped feed them. It was Jesus that healed bodies. It was Jesus that did all the things for them. And it was Jesus that fed the 5,000. And they're standing there. They're the guys that passed out the fish and passed out the bread. They're the guys that collected 12 basketfuls out of the miracle. They're the guys that were walking around, watching it all happen, not seeing how it happened, not understanding how their hands broke bread, and there was more bread every time they pulled it. If you were here last night, you saw our evangelist begin to pull. He had a bag about this tall, and he began to pull a pole, what looked like a pole or a straw, out of the bag. And he kept pulling and kept pulling and kept pulling. The bag's this tall, and by the end, he has about an 8-foot-long straw standing, looking to you like a solid 8-foot straw standing there beside him out of a 1.5-foot tall bag. And everybody in the room, if you were in the room, was like, wow, how did that happen? And the disciples were the ones that were pulling the straw. And yet they didn't know how it was coming out of the bag constantly as they fed people. And so it's not the religious leaders that are offended. I find that interesting. The church that are offended at this point, 6 days away from the execution, it is his followers. It's the insiders. It's the knowledgeable that don't understand. It's the knowers that have no clue. It's the handlers that don't know how. And they're questioning, well, why in the world did you allow that to happen? As he sits, now you've got to picture it, as he sits eating fried chicken, little green beans, a little mashed potatoes, and then oil, this this highly pungent, it's not your average oil, it's highly pungent oil made to cover the stench of a decaying body, is dripping down off of his curls and dropping off of his beard and soaking his clothes, covering the smell of dinner, filling their nostrils with what they recognize as the scent of death. You know what I'm talking about. You come to a funeral, and what do you smell? Lilies. Whenever you walk by lilies, whenever I walk by, I go to a lot of funerals, and I preach a lot of funerals, and, that's just part of my job. Lilies smells like somebody died. To me, I would never plant lilies. Go to my house, there's lilies around the yard. No, it ain't going to happen in my house. I don't want lilies around my house. I want to live for a little while longer. And you start bringing lilies, and you make me nervous. Don't give me lilies, okay? If you want to celebrate my birthday, don't bring me, and don't do it as a joke either. I know some of you, don't do it as a joke either. Lilies smell like death. And what she broke open and what she poured out smelled like death. Well, why death? He's alive. Why death? He's having dinner. Check Jesus. He's not even running a fever. She's not had him in for x-rays or checked his skull with a CAT scan to find a hidden tumor. He's sitting at dinner, and they think, well, he's fixing to reveal himself as the Messiah. He's fixing to bring out his white horse, and he's going to pull out his shield and his sword, and he's going to overthrow the Romans, and this is what we're all here for. And they just, I just want to say to us, I want to say to you, we better be careful judging the action. Our sign team, we have in the balcony, gathered right this second, is our guys. And he'll make a grunting sound. Wonderful. It's wonderful having Bruce around here working. Sometimes I beep and wave. And I think, you're an idiot. Beep, beep, wave. And he just down working. You think for a moment, how rude. And then you drive by and you think, how stupid am I? I'm beeping and waving at a deaf guy. He can't hear anything. The whole complicated, difficult thing is they just don't understand worship. I don't understand. And I really doubt the lady who breaks the box. I don't know that she fully saw the cross. Nowhere does it say she understood what was going to happen. Her part in the grand play was not explained to her. She didn't understand. She wasn't a prophetess who fully grasped 6 days from now. It's not a long time to view in the future. There are those that I just read, there's a woman in Italy that they're hunting for. She is by being a spiritist, someone who could write every country and has drawn money out of older people around the world, promising a spiritist that wins the lottery. And nobody else would ever play. If all the spiritists won every single time, then you'd just follow her along, and whatever you picked a number, you'd pick it and you'd win together, right? But they never win. They always promise good stuff for you, but they never win the lottery. I don't know that I've ever heard of a spiritist or supernaturalist or any of that category of fake win the lottery. Do it out of 100 people. Anybody in the room ever heard of one of them ever winning the lottery? Well, doesn't that say something? They don't even run the stock market. You could make money every day in the stock market if you knew tomorrow. Just if you knew tomorrow, you don't even need to know 6 days. And so nowhere does it say she knew 6 days out. And so she what would move you to give away a year's salary? What would move you to give away a year and be a missionary for a year? What would move you to take your life savings in the distance? You to do that. The only thing that I could think of that could drive someone to do that is either they were fooled let me put on your class. I don't mean that kind of love. That she would be so moved. And it doesn't even make sense. There's no known reason for her. If you put yourself in her shoes, there's no that he was going to the cross or going to die. It was a little group of disciples around the fire in the middle of the evening when no other folks were around. She probably doesn't even know about that. The Bible's certainly not been written this. She'd been saving it, she'd been holding it, she'd been looking for something future that she had it reserved for. Maybe a loved one, maybe a marriage, maybe they're going to die a death together, and this would be their final act of love. And who knows what drove her to store it up and to spend the money and to hold on to it and to value it. But she was compelled. I find it in college students down last Sunday came down into the altar and he just was compelled. He was in an act of worship was jumping in the altar and throwing his hands into the air, magnifying God. I don't know exactly what things he's been weighed down by, but he in a moment all of a sudden felt a freedom to worship God and a freedom from the normal difficulties and pains that attack us and weigh on us all, and the complexities of life and the problems and the heartaches and the classes and the homework and I understand I had a homework due by midnight last night. And after the children's event, I had to go home and open up my laptop. I crawled up in bed, had to barely keep my eyes open and type the rest of my paper and get the rest of my work done and send it in to my professor and send another one that I'd done this weekend and do it right and make sure it was all organized and set up. And I had to midnight to do it, and 11:49 I hit send, closed my laptop and passed out. Thank God I am free. Hallelujah. I felt that way at midnight. Thank God I'm free from that. But you know what? My next class starts this afternoon. And it's probably posted online right now. And I'm going to have to get on after church today and sit down and watch an hour and a half or two of my teacher instructing. I don't see how you can sit and listen to somebody just for hours and hours drone on and on and on. And she was compelled to worship, compelled to sacrifice. She was not compelled in such a way. She was compelled in such a way she wanted. See her, if you would, standing outside looking in, recognizing that's where Jesus went. And she said, why don't you tell me? Why do you have to act like you act? Sometimes you just go do something and you don't tell me why you're doing it, and I don't know anything about it, and I just feel like I don't know why you're doing what you're doing. Sometimes it just frustrates me that you just go do it. And I'll be honest, I told my wife, I said, because you're an editor. From your perspective, and you want to add value to my life, and you want to help me along life's journey, and I understand what you're trying to accomplish and how my wife makes me better. She does. I'm not knocking my wife at all. She does make me better, and she does improve me, and some of her edits are valuable. But sometimes I don't need to be edited. Sometimes I want to do what I want to do because I want to sacrifice that. I want to give that time. I want to get that job done. I want to do it a particular way. And I didn't tell my wife what I was going to go do, and I went and did it. It was a wild, outrageous nothing. It's not big. It's not important. It was just a thing that I wanted to do, and I went and did it. And I didn't tell her because I know my wife. My wife would say, well, you don't have to do that. Well, somebody else ought to do that. Or she would say, well, do that do that tomorrow. Or don't do it. And in some shove it over to the side and not value it the way I wanted it done, or something. In some way, my wife would edit it. And I did not want an editor at that moment. Do you get my drift? I wanted just to do what I wanted to do. And so this woman she didn't ask anybody. She didn't go around saying, you know what, should I or shouldn't I? Should I fall and worship him or shouldn't I? Should I throw my life savings on his head? Should I break into the room and break into a dinner conversation and give my all? What do you think about that? What do you good saints of God, you holy people, you righteous, caring, loving people, the ones that you sacrifice and you pay tithe or you give offerings or you sit and listen to me ramble on for weeks on end? You guys that run offices or businesses or manage people, what advice would you give? All right, here's the question. It's a simple thing. Here's the question. I'm going to throw all my life savings on Jesus' head, or shouldn't I? What would you say? What would I say? As your pastor, a lot of people come to me and ask me for advice and ask questions, and I've got this decision or that. I don't do that. I will not do that. You've got to be responsible for your own decision. But I can help and guide you, and you can take my advice or you can leave my advice, and I'll be your pastor either way. I think there's consequences if you're asking for spiritual guidance. I think there's consequences to not taking my advice. never been one to make your decision for you, and I'm not going to start making your decisions for you. So I'm the guy that you might ask. And we're talking about how to get hard decisions, how to come to hard decisions, how do you get through hard decisions. And so we're asking the question to you is, what advice would you give to this woman? Would you analyze it? Would you step back and calculate out? Let's see, $50,000, and you make $50,000, and you've been saving now for 15 years to get a $50,000 retirement, and you bought this vase. It was a very expensive vase, and this is the only time you'll ever be able to use it, and you're going to break it open, and you're going to just pour it out on Jesus' head, and there's no good reason. You can't explain why. You don't know what this means. You don't know why you're doing it. You can't explain what the future is of your sacrifice, what the future is of your the return on investment. What's your ROI on worship? Is it going to rain back to you to give this? Why are you doing it? Well, I don't know. I'm compelled to serve God this way. I'm compelled to give God my all. I'm compelled to break it open. I'm compelled to just pour it on his head. Myself would advise against it. If you asked me 6 days before the cross, I'd probably tell you don't do it. His disciples said, why this waste? Here's the fundamental question. Here's always the fundamental question. Why? The rest of it doesn't matter. The only question they really were asking is, why? Why did you do that? The second part is they saw it as a waste. Why? It's a waste. Individual analysis says that's a waste. He's not go out tomorrow and maybe he's not going to even be able to stand it after a while because it's just so overwhelming and so strong, and people aren't going to be able to value somebody who smells like that walking around. Here's one of our problems. Here's one of the problems of church, the problems of Christians. Sometimes we're really right and completely wrong. $50,000 could do to the faith mission. Who live across the street from us in some of this rundown housing. $50,000 if you're making I don't know a year's worth of. I'll just throw it out there. I don't want to do the math. Chelsea, I'll make you do the math. How much a $50,000 going to do? Let's round it off and say it's $1,000 a month, no interest. You could give someone 50 free months of living. Does anyone in the room think it would get 50 months? Think of what that would do for a line with food stamps and have the people look down their nose. I've had to go to the grocery store at one point in my life with food stamps, and food stamps can be demeaning. one. Would $50,000 make a difference? Jesus, hold my hand. Think of that. $50,000 would make a huge dent. You could take your kids to Disney. They could go to the park, or you could take a Saturday off. You wouldn't have the pressure. You wouldn't have to sweat thinking, how am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to pay my college tuition? Just think of the release. The disciples, the problem with the question is that the disciples were right and wrong. And that's the complexity of following Christ. That's the complexity. Don't ever think Christianity is simplistic. It's just, oh, when you see a poor person, hand them $20. Hey, I'm a Christian. Hey, you see a mom struggling with a couple of kids, trying to improve herself, trying to get a degree, trying to, move forward, trying to feed her family, trying to let her kids in tight financial conditions. And we've got several moms sitting in the audience that you know exactly what I'm talking about. And yet you want your kids to thrive. You want them to enjoy. You want them to experience pleasure and carefree life. And you don't want your kids to have to carry the burdens of single parenthood and all the things that go along with that, and how much of a benefit it would be if the church would just give you $50,000. The next time $50,000 gets dropped in the offering plate, I'm just going to turn it over to you. Well, since the last time that $50,000 ever got put in the offering plate was never, don't hold your breath, okay? And what a great idea, that, isn't it? Does anybody disagree that it would be a huge help to a single mom? Would you love 50 grand to just pay your bills for 5 years or 50 months? And so sometimes we oversimplify as a preacher. We oversimplify. We make it simplistic. Did they? $1,000 been in the pocketbook because he was the guy that kept pulling money out of the pocketbook and putting it in his own pocket. Judas Iscariot was known to put a little in his own. And we don't know that it was Judas Iscariot alone that was complaining. But his complaint was not from a pure heart. It wasn't because he cared for Rachel and her children. Because he wanted a little bit in his own pocket. That's not overt, but it is covert. You see, overtly, we can't always see what's going on in someone's heart. And sometimes people say really good things from really bad hearts. Sometimes they say really good things with hidden motives, with ulterior things in mind. And he wants stuff. And the other disciples joined in. She has done a good thing. Read on. For you have the poor always with you, but me you have not always. You see, he knew 6 days was coming. He knew he had a short horizon. He knew that he was walking to the cross. And he knew that what she did for the future. She did for the cross. He was not going to have time for a proper burial. He was not going to have time for his body to be washed and for the incense to be put under each wrap of the material as they wrapped it around his body. They would insert incense and they would put the spikenard and the nard there in the fabric and underneath the fabric, and they would wrap it literally as they wrapped his dead body, and they would care for and wash all the blood off and prepare his body and get it ready so it would be able to lie in a great condition in state. They would show respect to the body. If you've ever been around a funeral home, that's one thing that you hear. They're trying to respect the family. They're trying to respect the dead. They don't want to be demeaning at all. And it's pretty demeaning to take a body off the cross and wrap it roughly and stuff it in a cave and throw a rock on it without any respect, without any semblance of honor or dignity, or not even washing the body off, not doing a proper cleansing, not doing anything to prepare the body. But it's becoming evening and Sabbath is showing up, and Sabbath is almost here, and we've got to do it before the Sabbath, because on the Sabbath we can't do all of these other things. We've got to honor the Sabbath. And so in order to bury Christ, they had to quickly bury him in order not to dishonor the Sabbath. So the God of the Sabbath had to be dishonored to honor the Sabbath that he had created for man. The Sabbath is not Lord over man, but the Sabbath was made to benefit man. And yet they'd flipped it around, as religious people often do. They'd flipped it around and they wanted to honor the Sabbath. And so they dishonor the Savior. So I'd caution you. I laid my watch down and the clock's out and I can't see what it is. It's 11:10. I now see there in the little corner. Is that correct? So I got to quit. And as my normal is, I could preach more, as you well know. But we got to quit. So Jesus doesn't condemn the woman for her overexertion in worship, for her sacrifice, for her expression of love. There's no condemnation to her. There's condemnation to the religious who want to criticize the gift of worship. They want to criticize the gift of love. They want to criticize, let's call it, her emotional extravagance. They want to condemn. They don't understand. They don't want to give the gift. They don't want to honor the sacrifice. And so they stand apart and point fingers and criticize. And yet that woman who gave her all, she didn't know the end result, but she knew exactly what she was doing. She was going to honor the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And she was going to give her absolute best to give God all the glory that she possibly could. And she was willing to sacrifice the embarrassment of interrupting a dinner. I find it funny that people don't like Pentecostal worship, and people make sometimes negative comments about Pentecostal worship and its inappropriateness, and people jump or holler or shout. You don't have to do that, which might be true. You don't have to do it, but it's not about whether we have to or not. It's because we get to magnify God. And if there's not a more appropriate place to do it in the house of God, think. She gave her abundant offering of worship at dinner. So the next time you're in McDonald's, and instead of opening up your burger and laying out your fries and bowing your head and going, "Thank you, Lord, for your food of this. Don't let anybody see me praying right now. Amen." I heard one of my friends say, we were out at dinner afterwards, after the meeting last night down at Chili's, and one of them said, the evangelist actually said, I was with a pastor and he waited till the waitress got there. Typically, I wait till the waitress is done passing out food because She may either ignore that we're praying and pass out food and set drinks down or whatever while we're praying. And we might feel that's rude to be interrupted for our prayer. Or you wait till she's completely gone. Or she may just stand there holding food in the air, and then you're interrupting. She's got a lot of things to do, and you're kind of interrupting her job so you can pray. I appreciate them, honoring prayer, but you are stopping them from doing their job when you're praying. So which is the best way? Well, this particular evangelist, Phil Wagner, said, the pastor that I was with, he waits till the waitress comes to the table, and he asks her, "Ma'am, we're fixing to pray for our food, and we believe God hears us pray. Do you have anything that you want us to pray for?" He said this immediately after the young lady came to our table and said, "Hey, do y'all go to church? Where do you go to church? I'm kind of looking for a church. I'm new in the area, and I'm trying to find, my boyfriend and I are trying to find a church that would work. And you seem like nice people, and we just wondered." And so we had a conversation about church and God and worship and all this stuff. And then she leaves the table, and he says, we pray. Every time we pray, he waits for the waitress to get there and said, do you have anything for prayer? Would you want to join us? And I thought, well, that's interesting. I'd kind of always looked at it as, you don't want to interrupt her, you don't want to bother her, you don't want to embarrass her, you don't want to, all these other things. And this pastor flipped it over and said, I want to include her in my prayer. And I think that's a better way of doing it. I haven't done it yet. Ask me when I try it. I'll get a variety of responses. I'll guarantee you that. It will be a variety of responses. But I'm going to see if I can incorporate that into my behavior. And the whole point, I close with, how do you make hard choices? Well, the hardest choice is not to love God with all of your heart, mind, soul, body, and strength. And when you're honoring God and you're worshiping God, give Him your all. Give your all to God. Don't worry about the consequences. Don't worry about the return on investment. God takes care of that. Amen? Thank you for joining with us today. May the Lord richly bless you. We're going to take a short break. We're going to come back in for our second worship service, and we're going to worship, and the praise team's going to sing. We're going to have a great time giving God our all. God bless you. Take a few minutes. Amen. Step out, do whatever you need to do, shake some hands. Thank you for joining us this morning for the lesson.